Welcome to the 27th Senate District Debate. I'm Jason Schaff, editor of The Signal, and I'll be your moderator. This debate is one of a series of Signal multimedia debates we're doing this summer, featuring local races, state races, city council race, congressional races of our local district. Let's meet our candidates. By the way, this is being live streamed on our website, signalscv.com, and it'll be put up as a video after the live streaming so that people who missed it can watch it. Let's meet our candidates. We have, in alphabetical order, Steve Fazio, he's a Republican, and Henry Stern, he's a Democrat. Journalists asking questions tonight are both from The Signal. The woman in red is Lila Littlejohn, managing editor of The Signal. And then Jana Adkins, she's business editor of The Signal. She's also the editor of the Santa Clarita Valley Business Journal. She wears two hats. Here's the ground rules. We want to keep it as relaxed as possible. We want a lot of back and forth, give and take from these guys. But there has to be some order to this, obviously. Each candidate will have a 3-minute opening statement. After that, Lila and Jana will then begin asking questions. Audience members were asked to suggest some questions when they signed up for the event, so we've included some of those questions from the audience. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question. And Shelby, who is with us this summer, recent Trinity Academy graduate, is going to be the one with the timer and cutting them off. No, I'll actually cut them off. But she'll time. Lila and Jana or myself will be allowed to ask follow-up questions if we deem that necessary. And then candidates can, respond to a statement that's one of the other candidate made. But let's keep it short, maybe a minute or so. And then I'll see how, we'd like the back and forth to go, but we don't want one question to last for 20 minutes. So I'll sort of stop you if I think it's like too much. And we just want to be as flexible as possible. Then at the end, 2-minute closing statement by the candidates. So let's get going. First question, and the first to answer this question will be Steve Fazio.
Intro?
Oh, I'm sorry. 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Intro. Thanks, Jana.
Thank you for organizing this. It's my first time in this area. It's a beautiful campus, and thanks to The Signal for putting this on as well. I am running, Nicole and I should say, really are running. It's a team sport, as we all know, because we have 4 kids between us. We are from the area. We grew up in the San Fernando Valley, which is about a 3-hour drive, 10 miles away. We are in business in that area. We are in business in this region. And I'm really running for 3 different, causes, if you will. One is it's become untenable to run a small business in California. We get sued constantly for things. There's no tort reform. We get sued by our state. We get sued by our local governments. We have lawsuits that continue to happen. Most of them are frivolous. Most of the time the judge, even says, I know this is very unfair, but this is, what goes on here. And it just becomes very, very frustrating to run a business in California. God forbid you get rid of somebody for, embezzling money from you. You get sued the next day for, whatever, that just goes on and on and on. So, to try and run a small business in California has just become untenable, and we're getting, a lot of our businesses are exiting to other states, and that's kind of one of my primary reasons for running is to add that voice to the legislative choir with somebody that's actually run a small business and has that experience. The second one is I was a reserve with LAPD for 30 years, and I find what's going on in our criminal justice system to be very frustrating. Our cops are frustrated, you know, the chiefs, the sheriffs, the deputies, the jailers, they're all sort of frustrated with what's gone on with realignment, with what's gone on with Prop 47, with what's gone on to early release programs, and we're filling our streets with homeless without there being a mechanism to go ahead and help those folks out. We're filling our streets with what are supposed nonviolent offenders, but it's been plea bargained down to a point where these folks are back down on the street as well, and we're seeing increases in violent crime and property crime, and it's very unfair for our neighborhoods, and again, our police officers and our deputy sheriffs are frustrated at that. And the third reason is our schools. While they're great out here with the Hart School District and others in certain enclaves of the district that we're running in, the LA Unified is sort of a disaster and nobody's really doing a whole lot about it. I think the teachers are by and large very committed and great, but there needs to be some outcome-based, you know, measurement systems within the school system, and there needs to be some accountability within the school system. So those are kind of the three major themes that have motivated me to run. I've never run before. I am running as a Republican. I am not associating myself with the National Republican Party. I am far more moderate than what it is one sees on TV with what's going on with that show up there. I am embarrassed, frankly, half the time when I watch TV, with what goes on with both parties. Again, I'm a moderate Republican. The social issues are not what it is that motivated me. I'm a social moderate. It's really the business, the fiscal things, the law enforcement things, and the schools that have caused me to be here today, and the fact that we have kids that I want to make sure have employment opportunities when they get to that point. Thank you.
Henry?
Thank you, Jason, and thank you to the Signal and the Business Journal for hosting this. I don't know if those of you viewing online can see, but it's a little sparse of attendance tonight. I would say that these state Senate races, do not sleep on them. It may be more entertaining to watch the grudge match going on TV that Steve refers to. But here at the state level, we have enormous power over the sixth largest economy in the whole world, California. We are bigger than Brazil, bigger than India. And even though Washington is mired in gridlock and suffering under a political discord that we've never seen in my lifetime, I've only been on this planet for 34 years, but it's pretty ugly out there. I think we can do things better here at the state level, and I truly believe that local government is the best form of government. So I'm running as a teacher and as an environmental attorney. Those are my two areas of law and background that I'm trying to bring to bear here. I'm a millennial. I was graduated class of 2000 in this district, would be the youngest state senator actually in the state of California if elected. And I truly believe that my generation has to step up and lead right now. That the problems we're facing on public safety, on education, on the business climate, on the environment, a lot of things that Steve's even going to talk to you about, I think we need new energy to address those problems. And I think that someone who has to live here for hopefully the next 70 years and live in this district will have a different kind of perspective that neither the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, frankly, is bringing to bear. So my background, a little bit, I was an environmental attorney on the private side before my experience in government. I've been serving as Senator Pavley's senior policy advisor for the last 5 years. Prior to that, though, I built infrastructure projects all over the country. So I know that there is meaning to how businesses address their bottom line. And it's not just a bunch of bureaucrats making decisions about how this economy ought to function. That there are the real job creators out there are not in government. They are in the private sector. And I believe in a limited role for government in that regard. But I also believe that strong regulations done fairly and transparently have a really important place in governing how this economy runs. We saw it in the instance of Porter Ranch, which I was the lead attorney on for Senator Pavley, finally getting a moratorium through and stopping the gas company from further injecting any gas in that formation. We didn't have clear, transparent rules, and we didn't enforce them well at a government level. So there still is an important purpose for government to protect our quality of life, and that's really what I'm running on. All the things that bring Republicans and Democrats together. Education, public safety, the environment, and taking care of our neighborhoods and our kids. So thank you for the opportunity this evening, Jason.
You do realize in 70 years I'll be 126, so
yeah.
He's got me there.
Well, he's going to be 104.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
I don't know.
I know, I was
He's
being
not going to be on the
presumptuous.
racquetball court.
I'm grateful
probably.
for every day.
1 point to Henry.
Okay, now to the part I was dying to get to, is the questions. And Steve, you'll answer first, and then we'll go back and forth with who's going to answer. So, Lila, take it away.
All right. An issue very much on our mind up here right now is fire containment or fire management. We have one of the worst fires that we've seen here since at least 2009, just winding up right now. So what kind of statewide fire management system would you think makes sense in this state?
Well, and my heart goes out to everybody that was displaced and the animals that were traumatized and people whose home were burned and the whole thing was bad. I was calling friends here to find out how they were doing and worried about them, and I'm glad that it's under control. But I was on the fire commission for 4 years, or a little over 3 years, I think, and I learned a little bit, enough to be dangerous about sort of, the fire service. The men and women that do that job are amazing. But, we don't really have mitigation factors, kind of under our belt with that. We develop these kind of areas in the outland areas, the wildlife areas, where we're not allowed to really mitigate anything because there are so many environmental balances that we have to make sure that we maintain, and I understand that. But there's a lot of homes that have like 8 feet high of dry brush, but you can't go in there and clear it out for one reason or another, even though it all becomes fuel, ultimately when there is a fire. And we also don't have an infrastructure on the state level or a local level. We have to rent things all the time every time there's a fire. Like the city of LA has to rent those Erickson water dropping cranes, and we have to order things. It seems to me we could have a better, more apparatus in the areas to help us when we do have these huge conflagrations. And it seems to me that we could create some mitigation tools and methods, back burning and certain things that we could work with the environmental folks and see what we could do to create those areas that have that fuel or that 8 foot high of brush that's dry and hasn't been burned off in sometimes 20, 30 years. We have to do something to reduce that, knowing that there is a balance there. We don't want to burn the wildlife in there, but we do have to do something that mitigates us from having these huge fires and displacing people and putting people at risk. And we're really kind of, we haven't really struck a balance there. We basically just kind of backed off and said, okay, it's environmentally protected, we can't do anything, and that's not really working, I think, either. So we have to come up with some mitigating measures, and we have to come up with a way of either contracting or purchasing more apparatus, aerial apparatus, to make sure that we can deal with this stuff quickly.
Okay.
Thank you for raising that as question number one. I think we're at, what are we at, 70% containment now, something like that? But
about that, yeah.
It took a while. I mean, to Steve's point, this region had been building up for a long time, and the hills that burned, I mean, thank God it did not jump the 14, because if it's getting over there, we're down the 5. And I grew up on the very opposite side of this district, out in Malibu, and grew up with fires in my backyard. I mean, had to evacuate my home growing up back in, what was it, 1990, and again in 94, and we've seen it. And interestingly, everyone wonders what connects this district. Well, that risk exposure, what does Malibu have in common with Santa Clarita? Most people say nothing, but that is something. I do agree that there ought to be more mitigation work coming out of Sacramento. I think the policies are a little bit rigid. We've been working on the Resources Committee, which Senator Pavley has chaired for the last 4 years, I believe, to start to do sort of reasonable mitigation, not just here, but in timber country around the state, where you're not out there clear cutting and you're not displacing habitat, but you are finding a way to reduce that fire hazard. I don't think that the answer is charging unlimited fees, however, to the homeowners, because we've seen state government use some of that SRA money, and frankly, it hasn't really worked as well as it should, and often they can't spend the money they have. So I don't think the burden all ought to be placed on the residents of Santa Clarita and this region and the homeowners here, especially if they're not incurring the same benefit. I'd like to see Caltrans and some of the state agencies do a better job, frankly, of mitigating right around the freeways. This started with a car fire. And if we had had a little smarter brush management just along those freeways, we could have preempted some of that up front. But I gotta say, the fact that our men and women held the line and blocked that thing from jumping the 14, a lot of people are alive today thanks to them. So I'm honored to have the firefighters' support for my stepping up on those issues.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question, and this is for you, Henry.
Yeah.
If I may use your first name. As an environmental lawyer, well, 2 points. You talked about keeping brush cleared, et cetera, and not charging homeowners excessive fees. One of the things that emergency responders commented on is what a good job homeowners had done out here clearing brush from around their homes. And this, quite frankly, the fire was raging through areas that for the most part people don't live in and would not have cleared anyhow. So as an environmental lawyer, would you advocate any type of tree clearing in the state? We have a bark beetle infestation. There's a lot of dead trees. Or what about controlled burns and ways to thin the forest so we don't face these wildfires every year?
I'd be open to that. We were looking at small diameter trees that had been, this bill that I was actually talking about, we've been looking at it with a Republican named Brian Dolly. He's from the north, furthest north assembly district in the entire state of California. So we've been trying to help him find that sweet spot of what is eligible for that kind of clearing without, you don't want to go after old growth. We have incredible oaks out here. We have, in our canyons, we have some amazing tree resources, but with the infestation of the bark beetle and the fungus coming back through this drought and all kinds of, there's hazard out there. And so I actually don't consider it necessarily to be a threat to the environment. I think healthy management of the forest in that way can mitigate some of the downside risk to wildlife, et cetera. So I don't think, as an environmentalist, you always just need to say no. That's not the way forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Steve, you got anything to add?
No, I just think, I'm friendly with folks in the Mandeville Canyon area as well, closer to where Henry's talking about, and they're actually quite fearful of the next fire there, because there are growths that are 12 and 15 feet high there of things that, yes, there are animals scurrying around about, I'm sure, but, if that catches on and the wind starts going, inbound, we're going to have some major issues, and it's being blocked for the most part by the endangered species group, and the folks that are sort of in the most progressive side of the environmental cause stop us from doing things at times, and we need to rebalance that, I think.
Jana, next question.
This is kind of an intro type question, but Santa Clarita Valley is such a small part of the 27th district, and so I'd like to ask each one of you how you can ensure that we won't become an afterthought in your agenda.
Henry, start.
Well, I'd like to think that the character that defines Santa Clarita, the sort of semi-rural character that, this region is self-sustaining and very unique among many other parts of LA County. And I grew up in that same kind of life. I come from a ranching family. I'm a 6th-generation Californian, and I also grew up in the entertainment industry, both of which are intimately intertwined out here in the valley. William S. Hart, right? Starting out and founding this out with Wyatt Earp. The heritage in this community is so unique, and that through line, we can pull that thread and string it all through this district. Because I'll tell you, out in Simi Valley and out in Malibu and out in Topanga, the families have very similar concerns. People want their way of life protected. They want to know they're going to have good jobs, but they don't want breakneck growth where you have the population of this city doubling in the next 10 years. I think in a limited and non-intrusive way, because I truly want to approach my politics in a way that does respect the will of local government, but in a helpful way, I want to bring Sacramento resources to bear, whether it's on your water issues. The water bond and the water agencies need to step up and deliver. On some of these resources issues, I think we can do some silo busting and really start delivering for this city. I take pride in the fact that my office has worked very closely with this city to try to deal with CEMEX and a whole host of other issues. So I'd like to prove to the people of Santa Clarita that Sacramento is not just a burden on them, and it's not just a source of regulation, but that it's actually a help to our local economy and really protecting the character of this community, because it's very special and I think it's at risk.
Steve.
I've gotten to know Santa Clarita just recently as a result of this campaign. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know as much about it 9 or 10 months ago when I started this endeavor, and I've sort of fallen a little bit in love with this area. It's a great little enclave. It's like this sort of protected little area within the district that we're running in, and I think it can serve as a tremendous example, you know, of how government should work. Your local government works, your schools work, your water situation is something that's being resolved. Your law enforcement community is very tight-knit. You know, when you go down through what all the things are that you should deliver as local government, and you look at what Santa Clarita is all about, it really is the model community for what it is that we ought to be doing in many, many other areas. Maybe some of these large areas are just too big to manage, but this one sort of has its arms around how best to make sure that they hold their people accountable. And I also say that local government's the best government, and you know, you've probably been done a favor, you know, by Sacramento not paying as much attention to this community, you know, as they might have otherwise, because they've left you alone and you've done a good job with everything you've done. And where you need that support, you should get it, to be sure. But I love the fact that things, for the most part, work down here, and I think that's probably because you don't have, you know, the intrusion of other areas of our state government. So kudos to Santa Clarita. I would happily share an office down here with whoever ends up to be the assembly member. I have great relationships with folks that run the local government as well as the state government in this area, and whoever it is that ends up ultimately winning some of these other local races, I would love the opportunity to continue to collaborate with, and I've already begun to develop those relationships. And I'm not a highly partisan person, which I think helps, you know, because I can come in and work with either side of the aisle, and it won't be so distasteful that, you know, when my car's coming, people drive out the other direction. You know, we'll figure out whatever the needs are and see what we can do to maintain local control while providing your hard-earned tax-paying dollars at the state level, that you make sure you get your fair share. And that includes this transportation issue as well, but I'm being told to stop.
You'll get a little bit more time right now. So what other issues, you each mentioned a couple, what other issues are you aware of out in Santa Clarita Valley?
Directed towards me or Tanner?
You.
Me. Okay, well, I'm aware of the fact that there's been a long-standing water, you know, issue with contamination, and that issue is, you know, currently being hopefully resolved, and that there's a possibility of, you know, different ways of dealing with the delivery of water and management of water, and I think that's, again, healthy, and there will be a good, robust local debate on what the best way ultimately to deal with that is. And I think that's important. We also have a lot of issues going on right now in the region with regard to transportation. Again, I was being somewhat facetious earlier when I said I live, you know, 10 miles away, which takes about 3 hours. It is absurd. It is ridiculous. We're not getting our fair share down here of different ways that we can, you know, improve the traffic and the congestion. So there are some things that need to be done in order to make sure that we preserve the character while creating some sort of transportation infrastructure, which doesn't really exist right now.
Henry?
Right here, we're sitting at the site of a very important measure coming up on the ballot, Measure E, for College of the Canyons. I'm a proponent, and I think that reinvesting in this community college and this district is a huge supercharger for the local economy. I mean, 60% of the kids that are graduating high school out here are getting some form of education here at College of the Canyons. So my hat's off to the leadership of this community college, and I think that's a big issue. Cemex, Chiquita, Newhall Ranch, a lot of the new pressures on different types of infrastructure development, even the chlorides issue that Steve alluded to. We see this sort of collision of environmental law, local government control, state regulation, and even some federal regulation that I'm frankly frustrated to see so many impasses reached. I think that we've resolved Cemex well, and we were a big proponent of shutting that down. This was maybe a mining town, but not anymore. But those are some of the big ones on my list. But happy to dig in further when we get a little more time.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Okay. Lila, want to ask the next question?
Okay, both of you have mentioned water as an issue, and water is very much an issue for us. And it's also an area where the state has not left us alone. And so I would like to ask each of you what you see as your role, if you're elected, on our behalf, on this community's behalf, in terms of water at a statewide level, what could you bring to the table in terms of statewide policy change or something like that? But also on a local level, would you see yourself in a state senator's role as playing any role in what's going on here in terms of water?
Henry?
Yeah. So water is king in the Santa Clarita Valley, and this place wouldn't survive without it. What most people don't know is that some of it is actually coming from the groundwater, and that there are some local water resources that currently aren't being tapped and aren't being utilized because of some of these impasses you were mentioning. The chlorides issue is a real issue. I know some folks have said it's a fraud and they're frustrated. I get it. I get the local community resentment. I get the outrage that a regional water board or the EPA or some outside entities are going to come in and redefine the costs locally. I mean, the fees that are potentially going to be assessed on homeowners out here. I get the frustration, and I frankly think I helped write the water bond. And I think it's a shame that the groundwater cleanup fund has not been utilized for the Santa Clara River cleanup, because I think we could be dealing upstream with a lot of prevention, mitigating the cost of this chlorides cleanup issue. So I think we could be reducing the cost to homeowners if the state sort of fulfilled the mandate of the water bond and really prioritize some of this local cleanup. That said, I'm frustrated to see such an impasse, and I think part of it is policy, but part of it is just relationships. And I like to think that I have a unique ability to navigate bureaucracy, as painful as it is. That's my cross to bear in public service. So how do you sit down the EPA, the Regional Water Board, the local district, the sanitation district, and city council, and get them in a room and say, we got to move forward, because we got to bring water back to Santa Clarita. We can't survive without it here.
Steve?
I think there's overreach, I really do, when it comes to governmental, involvement with a lot of these regulatory issues. Just because you can measure something in the parts per trillion or what have you, which equals a thimble, full of something in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, doesn't mean ultimately that becomes the standard. And we don't even have standards with a lot of the things that we're talking about. So we can pump and treat, and things can get contaminated after they're pumped and treated, and go in circles and circles and circles. And when you talk to the water professionals, they're frustrated as well, because once different guidelines are in place, they seem to be impermeable boundaries where reasonableness can't prevail. And I think the state's responsible for promulgating a lot of very overly onerous, regulatory requirements on municipalities and water areas. I've talked to water masters over the years gone by, and they get frustrated with the state. So I think the state's in the way in a lot of things, and there's a lot of regulatory overreach, and a lot of times the local folks can pump and treat and do what's needed to be done without as much involvement from the state government. The Regional Water Quality Control Board, I mean, there is really no incentive ever for them to ultimately give a no further action letter or a completed, you're done type of letter, because what's the bureaucrats' incentive for saying everything's fine? If it's not, they're going to get killed. If it is, they're, so I get sort of from that, ultimate bureaucrat's point of view, but there should be some mechanism for when we finally have done what we can do to a limit where it's stable, and we're treating it, that we can be done with a project without the state constantly haranguing, the locals for making sure that things are done to the next degree and the next degree and the next degree. It becomes unreasonable at a certain point. Obviously, nobody wants contaminated water on the same behalf, and you don't want to have something in your water system that's going to do, something such as happened, in other parts of the country. That's ridiculous. So I'm not saying to that degree. I'm just saying that we're now at this point where the state government has gotten it to the nth degree, where it becomes unreasonable for people in the local communities to pump and treat and deal with what they need to deal with.
Do you think the state water board should be elected rather than appointed?
I don't think they should be appointed, because you've got a particular prevailing point of view in this state that relates to things that are so difficult, for people in the real world setting to be able to deal with them, that the more that you appoint people, the more you have just the same regulatory overreach and overly onerous standards by which people really can't meet, and people spend money on, you know, suing one another, and people spend money on making sure that the consultants are coming in and they're got differing opinions, and nothing's ever actually going to cleaning up the water. You know, everybody's just carrying briefcases in and, you know, providing their positions. So no, I don't think an appointed method is the best way. I guess given the choice between the two, I'd go with an elected versus a appointed.
How about you, Henry?
I generally tend to be skeptical of using the ballot box to do detailed policy and make appointments. I think there's too many referendums on the ballot, and yeah, I worry about politicizing the office. I do think the job of a state senator, and what we did in my shop with Senator Pavley, was strong oversight. Yeah, the confirmation process may be, you know, have some political impact as well, considering the Democrats do rule the legislature right now. But politicizing it to that degree, it's like the judiciary too. I mean, these races, there's so many on the ballot, and I think voters need a break. There's just, I don't want to flip to page 19 of my ballot to figure out what I'm doing. So
Yeah, and they're not going to know, like, we don't know who the judges are. They're not going to know who the water board
who's
people
the
are.
water board? And then
Yeah.
do you become susceptible to special interest funding of your campaign, and who has the money? And so I just, until we add comprehensive campaign finance reform, I really am reticent to add anything more onto the ballot in general these days. So,
Gianna, next question.
Gentlemen, if each of you could tell us how you will help create jobs in the Santa Clarita Valley?
who doing first?
Who's first? I don't know. What is there?
Steve is first.
Well, again, you know, regulation, I think, has driven business out of our state. You know, it's not any one thing, and that's where people get hung up on, whether it's $15 an hour increases in minimum wage, or if it's 3 or 6 days paid sick leave, or if it's the Affordable Health Care Act, or if it's a lack of tort reform in our state where employers continually get sued, or if it's, you know, labor laws that continue to just basically side through workers' comp with whoever it is that is the employee. So it's not any one of those things. But when you add up all those things, you find yourself in a situation that makes it where it's untenable to be an employer. So I do think that we need some relief for employers. I think there needs to be some sort of even small business stimulus packages. Our electeds, basically, when it comes time for campaigns, run out and try to fundraise to every single business in the area, speaking as though they somehow or another are on the side of business and they're going to do something for business. But I can't find one piece of legislation on the local level or on the state level or on the county level that anybody's put forth that does anything to help people in small business. So funds are drying up. Capital is hard now to come by for the small businesses in this state because basically the regulatory framework has just become so onerous that businesses would just as soon leave than try to figure out how to comply. So the one thing I need to do in my mind is to create some sort of business stimulus package to allow for businesses to have some relief from some of the things that we keep hitting them with. Certainly not to add any more. Our state put in, you know, minimum wage, and then right behind it, 3 days sick leave. Then the local municipalities put in, no, let's make it 6 days. Some of them want 12 days. Some of them put 9 days. You know, they don't really know what it's like to meet a bottom line obligation. And frankly, when you look at the folks that are up in Sacramento, there are very few, and I mean like a handful, you know, between the Senate and the Assembly. There is a handful of people up there, and not more than like 5% or 10% that have ever signed the front of a paycheck, that have ever done anything in private industry. They basically just go from, you know, one office to another, and they don't really have the experience. And we're getting hammered in the business community.
Henry.
Thank you. Henry?
So I like to just start with looking at some of the work I have done in terms of job creation through policy. I think that'd give you a better insight than just making promises about what I'm going to do, just what I've done. So the film tax credit, played a significant role in pushing that through. Now, those of you who may be fiscally conservative out there may say, we don't need another tax credit, we don't need tax breaks, you know, it's going to cause more costs in the system. I think that the key to creating jobs through government policy is letting the private sector do that for us and setting strong ground rules and having an incentive structure that plays to our strengths. So the entertainment industry, we don't need to reiterate it in Santa Clarita Valley, but throughout LA County and the rest of this state, it is a job creator. We put in $400 million a year, and we're already up at about 1.6 1.7 billion, 1.7 almost this year in growth. So you're more than tripling your bang for your buck with that tax credit. Industries like aerospace, entertainment, the creative economies that are really thriving out here, biotech is moving, medical technology industries, the energy industry. These are areas that I believe have long-term growth potential and need the right regulatory climate, but the answer, as a Democrat and as an attorney who's worked with some of the largest, most powerful businesses in this country, the answer is not cutting corners. The answer is not less regulations of safety, it's not cutting wages, it's not about skirting environmental rules. I take a much more optimistic view about where our state stands. We've created more jobs, twice as many jobs as our closest competitor in this country. So Rick Scott and Rick Perry and all the Ricks can come out to California all they want, but they can have those jobs. I think we need to race to the top. I'm not trying to beat China. That's an industrial economy. I think we're a knowledge-based economy in the future, and I think these sort of technology, engineering opportunities, and entertainment, if our schools hook up with our private sector and smart policymakers, we can get a lot done in the Santa Clarita Valley and beyond.
So I have a different point of view on this, as you might imagine. We've driven aerospace out of our state. It was a great employer, and yet they're gone. There's no reason for them to be here, so they've left for the most part. Biotech is leaving. They're frustrated by our regulatory environment as well. I speak with the CEOs of the companies, and they're basically frustrated, and they're finding it very, very difficult to meet a bottom line obligation, even in their own organizations, and they're kind of fracturing themselves where R&D goes here and manufacturing goes there. When you look at the entertainment industry, the favored son of the legislators and the electeds, we've got a $330 million tax credit, and this is where I always find it kind of interesting. So we've given them a tax credit to stay here and not, do their runaway production. Well, what about every other business, though? Why would you, if you see a correlation between reducing and giving tax credits to one industry, why would you not then correlate that to providing other industries with an opportunity to compete as well, and not leave our state? And yet that linkage is never made. There's an effort underway to eliminate Prop 13. There's an effort underway to make permanent the increases in taxes here in our state. So we're making it more and more difficult, not less and less easy for businesses to stay here.
Henry, you want to respond to?
Well, I would say some aerospace is leaving. Yes, some biotech is left, but I do not believe this is some systemic trend. There's a lot of feeling talk in our political dialogue these days. People feel like the climate's bad, but I believe in the facts, not the feeling about the business climate. The facts are that we are still the #1 manufacturing state in the country, that LA County is the hub of that. Look no further than the Lightning and the new contracts won out here in the Antelope and Santa Clarita Valley. That manufacturing is up, and we're growing on that front. And I will not concede the notion that somehow all this over-regulation is an impediment to our growth. And again, I cannot help but go back to Porter Ranch, because the gas company said your gas rates will be cheaper and small businesses will be able to grow faster, and it'll be less burden on your economy if you just let us pump in and out of that gas formation faster and faster. Look what happened, right? They skirted regulations, and now 10,000 people had to leave their homes, and property values are down 20%. So you got to be very careful in how you cut red tape, because you might just cut off an arm in the process.
Okay, Lila, you got the next question. What do you want to ask?
Well, I'm going to ask about homelessness, actually. Do you have a specific proposal to deal with the issue of homelessness? And if so, what would you do about it?
Directed towards me? Okay.
I believe you start, yes.
Yeah, it's directed towards, no, Henry. Henry, you're up.
First crack and then Bob's.
Yeah,
Oh.
back and forth.
Well, I would say I do support the Senate package, the No Place Like Home initiative, to divert some of the existing state funds for mental health services down to counties, local government, and some of the service providers. I think that'd be about 2-point-some-odd billion back to dealing with this issue, really starting with the housing first strategy. That is part of my homelessness solution. I think it does start with housing and wraparound services. You cannot treat homelessness, though, as one single rifle shot problem. Mental health challenges are a huge driver. But domestic violence is actually one of the #1 causes of homelessness among women in LA County. There are not enough resources in the San Fernando Valley right now to serve all the women and children who are affected by domestic violence. They'll sit in a shelter for 3 months, and then they get kicked off the rolls, and they end up in homelessness. LGBT youth, 4 times more likely than straight youth to be homeless. So there are a host of factors, but in terms of dealing really with the endemic cause that we cut back in the 80s when we pulled back our regional centers and we cut funding to mental health in the state, that's got to be fixed, and I think the Senate is moving, and the governor's endorsed it, and I think we've got a lot of folks in the business community stepping up to push more of that mental health services into housing that has the wraparound services with it. So that's something we ought to pay for as a public entity. I don't think the private sector is going to solve that problem on their own.
Steve?
There's almost no coordination between the state, county, and local governments as it relates to homelessness. I mean, it's really kind of pathetic with all the tax dollars we spend for them not to have been able to come up with some sort of infrastructure to help make sure that when our public safety folks, our paramedics and our cops are out on the street, that they have a mechanism when they see somebody that clearly is in need of help, be that substance abuse or, or as Henry points out, or some sort of abuse in the home or a lack of jobs, that are out there. There ought to be a way of them finding places and avenues, and yet there's no such real thing that exists. When you talk to the cops out on the street and the deputies, they get frustrated because if there is somebody that is, afflicted with a mental health issue, and we can all identify them, they're pushing a shopping cart back and forth and talking to themselves or whatever, there's clearly a problem. They don't have any incentive to stop them at this point because it ultimately escalates into a use of force report, and now they got to get mired in that, and then they take them to a hospital, and the hospital basically has no beds for them or no way of really interceding or dealing with it. Or you have to get a court order to allow for somebody, to put them on a 5150 hold, which a cop on the street can do, but there's no beds, in the hospital, and there's no provisions for anyone to do anything about it. So it's a failure at all levels of government for us still to be talking about this. It's not like it's a new problem, and yet we have 47,000 homeless in this area, I'm told, that we can count. There's probably more. And we're doing really very little, if anything, about it. So it's really a failure at all levels. And I think to create some sort of a mechanism by which we can, create a conduit between the local, state, and even federal government to start to look at ways in which we can develop affordable housing for folks and to come up with a way of institutionalizing them in a way where they can learn the skills they need to possibly get out, but get them out of the streets. I mean, that's unfair to everybody, the neighborhood communities as well as the, as well as the actual afflicted person. And realignment hasn't helped either because that's pushed people out into the streets.
Okay.
Can I jump in on
Yeah,
the
sure.
Just, I'm trying to figure out real practical solutions to push this forward, and I'm just wondering, someone's got to pay, and for Steve, I mean, the Senate's trying to push some public funding there, and do you support that No Place Like Home initiative? And I don't know, how do you pay for it? Because we all know it's a problem. It's like, what's the answer? And it's not easy because people don't want to build a huge homeless shelter in their backyard, and I get that. But
You got homelessness, crime, mental health. It's a lot of stuff in the bucket, and I think we need a more comprehensive plan. We're no longer, graduating more than 50% of our kids in some of the districts, not this one, but, some of the enclaves in this area, which leads to crime, which leads to homelessness. So there's a vicious cycle. If we would step back from the whole thing and take a look at how we might be able to come up with trade schools and ways for kids that maybe just aren't college bound to have a place for them to go and to learn a trade. It could be a public-private partnership, and you start to incentivize them to come up with a longer-term plan for their life. That de-escalates some of the crime problems. There's a lot of things that we should be doing as a society, and we're not even paying attention to any of them, from at the level of the schools, all the way from EK to 12th grade for, again, kids that just aren't interested in a college career. Where is it that they go? Or maybe they're just not good at sitting in a classroom for 8 hours. There are people like that. So we have to come up with solutions at the ground level, and I think that will ultimately help manifest itself in more jobs, less homelessness, and mechanisms for placing people in places that they can get the help that they need.
Okay. Steve, I'd like you to ask Henry a burning question that you've wanted to know about him or his policies. And then I want Henry.
Personal, like what?
It can be anything. And then Henry, I want you to ask Steve. Okay, Steve.
Well, I guess, from a business person standpoint, I understand when people talk about that entry-level job person, that we should all make sure that we're not being too, quote, kind of greedy and not providing them with an opportunity. But where is the balance between creating public policy that enables people to also get a job as an entry-level person without putting the responsibility on businesses for them to then try to figure out how to stimulate a person in wanting to grow and climb that corporate ladder? I mean, it seems as though there's kind of a balance there that I don't feel as a business person we've weighted it too heavy on the business community, and we're not really looking at the responsibilities of the individual, and I'd like to know sort of like Henry's view on that.
So I would say if I'm lucky enough to be elected to be your senator, I'd actually want to work with business owners like Mr. Fazio to deal with some of the pressures on our wage policy. I would have, the way minimum wage is structured right now, which I think is part of what you're alluding to, lack of flexibility really for job creators, especially small business owners, and what they pay. I was an umpire and I was a busboy growing up, right? I think I made $5 an hour and they made $8 an hour. Was I feeding my family? No. Was I putting money away to save for college? Yes. Did I need the same amount to actually support a family of 3? No. So I think you're alluding to that sort of pressure and the lack of flexibility. I still would have voted at the state level for that $15 an hour because I didn't want to see LA County be on an uneven playing field with the rest of the state, because I'm worried about leakage and sort of this each county chasing the other, and Ventura or out in Orange County sort of feeding on that. That said, we're going to have to do more to sustain our small businesses. I just don't think the place to cut right now is at that minimum wage, because look, 15 is not enough. I don't care. It's not even about supporting a family. You still can't support a family on $15 an hour, just to be clear. And most of the people earning minimum wage out there are mothers with multiple children. I mean, that's what the studies have shown. It is not about teenagers putting away pocket money. So the bulk of the revenue that's going to be spent is going to be on those young people. But look, that to me again is not the place to cut. I do not think there is enough equality right now in our wage structure. I think there is too much being consolidated at the top, and I know your folks are got to pay $9 a shirt now or whatever because you got the minimum wage, but it's like whatever that other bump in the shirt, maybe I'm off. I don't know what the most recent is. I think it's worth it, and I think the buyers out in Westlake and LA can afford it, and I think it's a necessary expense to boosting our economy.
Are you able to rebut that, or is that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So, when you're running a small business and you're going to the bank for a loan and you're signing a personal guarantee on your bank loan as well as for your property owner, and you have this sort of static top line, which is the case for most businesses in this region at this point, unless they're in a certain enclave, and yet the government continues to raise the pressure and raise all the expenses from your property rates, your leasing, your common area maintenance, your taxes, and it starts to really compress that top line. It gets to the point where you're no longer viable as a business. And again, we're putting a lot of pressure on these businesses out there to be able to maintain what they have, much less start up a new business. And yet there's no provisions, in the way in which things have been promulgated to allow for those businesses to flourish, get their start, get their foothold. I think they feel as though there's sort of this sponge-like effect that just, businesses can absorb anything. We went to dinner the other night in a local restaurant, and they're closing at 9 o'clock now. My own organization, we're seeing the compression of the bottom line, where if it just continues, there won't be a business for anybody to be able to utilize anymore, and that's just not being, overly rhetorical. It's just that tough right now, and a lot of businesses are feeling that pain. But the regulators, none of whom have ever had a job in the private sector again, for the most part, have never signed a personal guarantee. They've never gone to the bank for a loan. They don't know what it's like to meet a bottom or a top line obligation, and they just are out of touch with what's going on Main Street. And to think that somebody can pay $9 to have a laundered shirt done, is to understand that that's just not how it works. They do it at home. They don't go out as often, and all this, and you can't hire anyone. So all this stuff ultimately conspires to make it a less robust economy, make it more difficult on everybody, and it makes it impossible to hire a new person because it's not $15 an hour when you all add it all up with all the other costs, workers' comp, affordable health care, on and on and on, work, and all the other costs. It's about $47,000, $48,000 a year. And I defy somebody to hire someone in a small business and pay each new person starting at 18, 19, 20 years old. You just can't absorb those kinds of costs in a small business. Unless you're a tech business, yeah, there's examples, but I'm talking about the ones that you would go out and drive and see along the road here. It becomes very, very difficult.
Henry, let me ask you this. Some of our businesses have said that they are often hiring people that they have to train, and I'm talking about advanced manufacturing, aerospace, et cetera. And they would at least like to see some relief with perhaps an apprentice type level wage, and that if the person learns the skill and performs, that then they could move them to minimum wage. Would you be amenable to talking with business owners about the different?
Yes, and I while I try to be as honest as possible and say if I were up in the legislature, would have voted for it. If I had the chance to actually amend that state law, would I have? Absolutely. I think not just in the manufacturing and the sort of trade-exposed industries, which I think need special attention from Sacramento, given the global nature of our competition. And I've worked with the manufacturing sector for years, actually, trying to figure out how to not just get the workforce going, but continue their competitiveness. But I would say beyond that, it's about a more granular kind of wage structure. I would have liked to see maybe more regional tailoring, accommodations for nonprofits. Right now, the Boys and Girls Club in my backyard's getting hit. So I'm not trying to say it's easy, but when the bulk of your jobs coming, hundreds of thousands of new jobs are going to be coming to Los Angeles County over the next 20, 30 years. LAEDC just did this report. The vast majority of them are going to be in the service sector. And so when you don't have that baseline protection in place, you're going to leave a lot of people behind. So I'd like to get up there and try to find ways to smartly tweak and tailor our wage laws to accommodate some of those exceptional cases. Because we need to be competitive there. I'm not giving up on manufacturing, no way.
And Steve, just to be fair to Henry, since I put him on the spot, if you weren't providing minimum wage competing at $15 where people had a better chance of finding a place to live, how would you see yourself continuing to provide the services such as your business does if you can't find people that can live in the area?
We have that problem now. We have that problem now. We are having a very, very, very difficult time finding people, and we have for many, many years. So I'm not really sure if you can maybe reframe your question in a way that I can answer it without bringing my own experience to bear. But we're having a very hard time hiring people in my organization.
What kind of solution would you propose then?
Well, again, I think that there has to be more sensitivity paid towards those of us who are in business to allow for us to figure out, ways to run our businesses without government constantly, reaching into our organizations with our cash flow, with our banking relationships, with our personal guarantees, and telling us what they believe ought to be the case with us as it relates to the employees that we employ. Our employees have been, have got wonderful benefits. We do a good job. It's a happy environment, and the state comes along and they basically, interfere with the small business person's ability to run and manage and grow their business.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock, but Henry, you didn't ask him
Oh, I got a quick one. Mine's way less wonky, though I appreciate that one. What are you going to do with the ballot box? Who are you going to vote for? I mean, what do you do as a Republican right now?
Well, to be completely, he asked me the question. I'm a very honest guy. I'm having a problem with it. I am not for the person that we have in our party, chosen to be our representative, and I'm equally unhappy with the other side's choice. So I know it's kind of a funny question on some level.
Sort of,
but
you got to make a choice.
But I could, I guess, say the same thing, but I know the answer. But I struggle with both of them. Being intellectually, honest and looking at who it is that we provided ourselves with as the two, choices. I struggle with it, and I guess I feel as though the primary process of our electing our president has failed us all. You know, what it's done is it's created the extremes on one end, because that caucus then will vote for that extreme, and then you get the extreme on the other end, and that caucus votes for that extreme. So you have a left-wing progressive, you know, like Bernie Sanders, God love him, and then you get, you know, the character we have on the right side. And I don't think it's, you know, I think most of us would choose none of the above. I like the bumper sticker I saw the other day with Seinfeld and Costanza. If they were on there, I might go with that.
But you got to do something in there.
You do.
Do you not check a box? Do you check a box?
I will thoughtfully, you know, check that box, you know, when the time comes.
Okay, we're out of time, but I want you guys to be able to do a 2-minute wrap up. Since I think we started with Steve at the beginning, Henry, give your wrap up.
Sure. Well.
No, wait a minute.
Oh,
Yeah, give your wrap up.
me first. All right. That's fine. I'm good.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Jason, Lila, Jana. Appreciate the time, and I see the ranks have swollen a bit. Good to see a more full house. We will be retweeting and republicizing this. Again, I really appreciate the debate with somebody like Steve, who you're not a politician, and I wasn't either. I somehow got converted into this line of work just because it's time for me to step up and serve. I see a window right now where the things I'm good at, the areas of law I know about, the experiences I've had in my life, whether it's working in juvenile justice system in the max units up in Alameda County and seeing kids convicted of murder and rape and all the worst offenses and how to deal with our criminal justice system, working on the toughest environmental battles in this state, whether it's fracking or SoCal Gas and the Porter Ranch incident, the water bond and tackling the drought crisis. How do you bring farmers together with environmentalists? How does one candidate have Sierra Club and the firefighters, Republicans out here, Laureen West, and at the same time you've got business leaders out in the Ventura County and the West Valley area coming together. This campaign is above traditional politics, and I think our local government can do that. I'm pledging just straightforward, competent, honest service to Santa Clarita and this entire district. I think competency counts, and we see far too much fanfare right now on TV, so maybe it's going to be a little boring, but I just want to get the basics done right. Your kids ought to be safe. They ought to get to school that's in a decent environment with good teachers, have mobility in their lives and be able to raise their families and do well. We ought to be able to breathe clean air and feel like we have these beautiful mountains still to cherish for generations to come, and make sure our towns are safe and that our law enforcement officials are respected and resource adequate. So the basics, that's what we got to execute on here at government, and I'm ready and willing to serve. So thank you.
Steve.
I too have enjoyed through the last several months getting to know Henry. I do believe he is probably a very competent environmental attorney. I have never had any question about that. My feelings as it relates to this state Senate district is that it requires something that has a little bit larger array of skills that can be brought to bear. I have been a job creator, a business person. I have served, my community as a reserve as well as a member of the Fire Commission. I have helped build a school in the region, so I understand sort of what goes on that level as well. I've raised my family in the region. And when I look at Sacramento, I think of it as sort of building an orchestra. I like the French horn. I really do. It's one of my favorite instruments, but 120 of them is a bit much. We basically know what it is that we have up there in Sacramento now with regard to their view as it relates to, environmental, global warming and all the other stuff. I mean, we know where Mr. DeLeon is, or Senator DeLeon, I should say. We know where many of the other state legislators are. We know where our governor is. We know where our lieutenant governor is. We know where our, U.S. Senate candidate is. We know where our president is. We have a lot of voices in that choir right now. I'm quite confident we're going to do a masterful job with making sure we strike a balance with regard to global warming and making sure that we're better environmental stewards than we've ever been. I think that's a box that we are well on our way to making sure we've resolved. Where I fear for our area here in this state is by not having people that understand what it's like to create jobs, not understanding the pressure of what it's like to be a small business person in the area, which is how a community and how a society is built through taxes. We don't really and are not doing a good job with our criminal justice system as we do early release programs, and we're filling our streets and our neighborhoods with, you know, criminals basically, and we have a philosophy in Sacramento that continues to do so. And we have a public school system, not including this one out here, thankfully, because you've done an excellent job, but in the larger state and in the other enclaves of the district, we've done a horrible job, and yet you hear nothing about it in Sacramento. So I'd like to bring those skills to this job in this area, and that's why I'm running.
Well, thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. I think it was good discussion.